All right, welcome back, everybody, to another episode of the Elemental Philosophorum. We have with us, as usual, Mark Steves from Ultimedia United. Brother, thank you so much for joining us today. How are you?
I'm doing great, dude. And Cam is very busy today with a couch and his lady. So we're gonna rock this one, just the two of us. And
Yep.
yeah, this is awesome. I feel like we talked a little bit about magnetism last time and in the first episode. And this element that we're going to be discussing today was found due to its magnetic properties in another mineral, an oxide, and it was discovered in like the 1700s by a British priest, right? And this guy discovered titanium, but um, it was interesting because they weren't able to really use it in large quantities until a couple hundred years later when they were using magnesium to sort of get the titanium out of these oxides, and they created something called sponge titanium, which is interesting. I don't know the I guess it's like a sort of the raw material, this loose porous sponge like oxide or oxidized metal, little ingots,
Yep.
you've ever
Yep.
been to a gem or mineral shop, you might have seen like maybe black tourmaline kind of looks like this a little
Yes.
bit. And then they, as we discussed in the last episode, they melt it down, create an alloy out of it,
Hmm.
and thus titanium was formed. And I think titanium, the reason I picked it, and I'm hoping this yields some fruit, because when we go into the conspiracy realm and we're learning about all the strange stuff in maybe the Bible, not that I'm Christian, you hear the Nephilim, you hear giants, you hear
Yes.
titans, So it's interesting that this metal got the name titanium, most likely because of its strength.
That is a very, very interesting point to bring up. I didn't even think of that. I mean, I know you're, again, you bring to the table in these episodes very strongly, like the esoteric aspect, the breaking down of the words and all that. And that's phenomenal because I mean, I brought more of the nuts and bolts aspect of it to the titanium element this episode. But wow, yeah, I didn't even think of that, going back to the Nephilims, the giants, the Anunnaki, titanium deriving from, again, English deriving from Latin. And we see, if I can add to that, we see instances of eyewitness accounts and interactions of human like or human looking extraterrestrials coming off of their craft and speaking Latin, which is interesting because, again, it shows that there's clearly some type of connection to the people of human ancestry pertaining to people, again, different extraterrestrials that have picked up on the Latin language or maybe even taught our ancestors Latin. And for that to be derivative of the word titanium, that's a very, very interesting point to make.
Mm. Yeah, it's definitely, a practice that I use when I'm looking into these things is like, okay, well, what does the root word, what is the prefix, the suffix, and how does that connect into the overall meaning or interpretation for this word? It's also interesting that titanium is described as a space metal because it is most at home in oxygen free environments. And then, if we're going to wrap that Titan Nephilim thing into there, it's like, yeah, what, they come from space allegedly, or they come from elsewhere, right? Anunnaki. And
Well,
so
yeah.
go ahead.
I just wanted to say, just to add to that too, and before you go on, probably the most popular story, not just in the UFO community, but around the world, really, is the Roswell crash. Now, again, let's put aside for a second whether or not that was the first crash in modern human history and things like this, even though, there's evidence of them going, these flying discs going back many thousands of years, but the metal picked up and obtained and harvested from that crash in Roswell was in fact a what has been classified as a titanium alloy metal, or memory metal, if you will. Memory metal meaning that the metal was so thin, and I mean, we can talk Colonel Marcel, Colonel Philip Corso, you name it, but the metal was so sophisticated in the sense that it's been described that Colonel Philip Corso said you can like crumple it up and then just drop it, and then it will automatically unfold itself back to the way it, in its original form was. But its original form is not just a laid out material, it's the form in which these extraterrestrial beings seem to like sort of melded into. It's like something within that metal knew this is my original form, and no matter which way it gets crumpled or what have you, this is the way it's going to go back.
Mm. Yeah, it's definitely bringing to mind black and white sort of sepia photos of Roswell, where you see this like, it looked almost like tinfoil, or what that guy,
Yep.
remember that weird news story of the kid who like flew away in an air
Yes.
balloon, a hot air balloon, and it was in fact like some kind of Mylar UFO type look-alike that this guy was trying to create. And I don't know if he actually put his kid in there, because the media is shady, and especially when it comes to stories about children, there's some weird stuff. So I don't know what the details were behind that news story, but it's bringing that whole thing to mind, like this thin, almost like a kite type of metal.
Right. Yes. And if I could say too, as well, according to UFOexplorations.com, we see here, and for those that follow our show at least fairly closely, you'll know that I've been speaking a lot about Battelle Corporation and Jacques Vallée recently, which only corroborates this here. And I quote, "In the months immediately following the Roswell crash, the Air Force contracted Battelle Memorial Institute to perform first ever work on novel titanium alloys. This included work on development of titanium and nickel alloy, the basis for what's called memory metal today, and similar to some of the debris reported at Roswell. 4 Wright-Patterson-sponsored technical studies on memory metal in later decades cited a 1949 Battelle report on nickel and titanium alloy. Nickel and titanium are used to create nitinol, the premier memory metal on Earth. The fact that 1949 report was referenced in shape recovery alloy research years later shows that somehow the Battelle report had a direct application and association to the memory metal subject. An earlier 1948 report was also uncovered that dealt with similar material issues." End quote.
Mm. So yeah, it's definitely, even before we go too far into the space world, it's used
Yeah.
in nuclear submarines, it's used in aircraft. So we know titanium is utilized even in the sort of above or outside of black budget type stuff. But
Yes.
to go back to the name, it was a German chemist by the name of Martin Heinrich Klaproth, and he named this unknown metal substance after the Titans, the Greek version of the Titans. And why, it doesn't really say. Maybe we can find more info. But he was studying rutile, so that's like a mineral that has titanium in it. But given what we talked about last week with the meteoric iron, I wouldn't be surprised if titanium is the result of asteroid impacts. Like it's
Yes.
found in these sort of areas where there's a high amount of meteor impacts. That's my kind of guess, I guess.
Well, you see, what's very interesting about all of this too is that we find, again, having to do with these certain very secretive projects, mining on the moon, mining on different planets, different comets. I can't help but think that, again, if this titanium or memory metal is something of significant value, no matter how available titanium is on any planet, on every planet, or what have you, star, comet, you name it, I can't help but think that it's never, especially from a human element, even maybe an extraterrestrial one or interdimensional one, enough is never enough, not necessarily in a bad way. But if this type of titanium material is as significant as is being presented, whether from my perspective or Mark's perspective, it clearly seems to be something that we can't go without, whether it's within commercial industry today, whether it's, like you said, Mark, very strongly, hundreds of years ago, why it was named that. I think there's too many components and angles and elements to this that factor in, like you said, used in nuclear submarines. It's just something we cannot go without in many ways.
Yeah, it's definitely used in all of those areas where these guys, these players like the Battelle, did you say Battelle Corporation?
Battelle Corp. Yes, correct. Yeah.
We go into them a little more and how they connect to titanium. Maybe
Yeah,
I
sure. So the Battelle Memorial Institute, if I pull up the official definition over here of what they do, I mean, I always make the joke on my show that they sort of, they're one of those institutions that are very vague in what they do. They are, according to Wikipedia, a private nonprofit applied science and technology development company headquartered in Columbus, Ohio. According to their website, battelle.org, we see over here very quickly. Accidentally, that took me to another link. Anyways, what they essentially do is they analyze metals, and they claim that, you know, they're very revolutionary in the here we go, is a global research and development organization committed to science and technology for the greater good. At Battelle, it can be done. So again, this is one of those things I say on the show that you kind of read those things and you go like, what, part of my English, what the fuck, like what did they tell us? They didn't tell us anything. You know, they're a nonprofit. Where they get their funding from, again, God knows. And even if we do find the funding and the financial transactions, it's going to tie back to something that is, again, going to just lead down more rabbit holes that connect to titanium. So it's just a constant circle. I mean, I would argue that the value of it is more important at a secretive level than that of the current, like, you know, fiat currency that we have.
Mm. Yeah, I'm finding something now about a mysterious like orb of with like a plug on one side. I'll share my screen.
Sure.
This oh, you disabled it. You gotta
Oh,
allow me to do it.
oh, sorry. Oh, here we go.
No
Hold on.
worries, no worries. But yeah, so they found this mysterious titanium sphere in their backyard in this, you know, farm wherever. But it's interesting that, you know, okay, so it's saying it was a part of a Chinese rocket, this titanium sphere. So yeah, it's used in weaponry. It's used because it has such a low density and a low weight. It's interesting that it's kind of featured as like a space oddity, you know.
Right. Yeah.
But it's saying that these are coming from man-made satellites and whatnot, like space junk. You know, titanium is being found in various places. Like here's another story in the Bahamas where they find a titanium sphere with mysterious Russian inscriptions on it. Well, I think that's just evidence of maybe them flying stuff around in upper atmosphere or maybe even space.
Sorry, I'm trying to, unfortunately, for some reason, it's not letting me uh, give you permission to share your screen. Did you want to send it over to me on the Zoom chat here? I can put it up on my end if.
Yeah, that works too.
Perfect, sweet. We see here very quickly, I wanted to bring up as well, according to visiontimes.com, what we'll find here is that the Defense Intelligence Agency took 3 years to respond to Mr. Bregalia's FOIA request pertaining to, again, memory, metal, and things like this. Now, the released documents reveal exciting technical applications that, quote, will change the way our lives are lived, according to Mr. Bregalia in his blog post. The PDF documents mentioned are metamaterials, invisibility, slowing the speed of light, compressing electromagnetic energy, and implanting memory metal in people, and other remarkable things. Now, again, the reason why I tie this back directly to, again, titanium is because we see here that, and I quote, it may be able to compress electromagnetic energy, making information and energy storage smaller and increasing their transfer speeds. The material also exhibits tunable resonance, which could be used to create energy harvesting technologies that draw energy from the environment or low power electronic devices, end quote. This would make sense in the sense of how, again, you in combination potentially with some other type of apparatus, whether esoteric or more nuts and bolts based, either way, people explaining, you know, when a UFO flies by me, my car battery shuts down, you know, but again, right before they get abducted, my radio stops working, my car battery shuts down. And interestingly enough, this is what I find most significant. I personally can attest to a handful of paranormal stories where there have been, for example, soldiers from the medieval times, if you will, that have, again, known to stay, their spirit is within a certain vicinity of a field or a location geographically, you name it. And as we know, because of, again, for many different reasons, esoterically or what have you, these spirits don't leave a certain area. And some of these spirits, in some cases that some people have told me, were, because they're from the medieval times, and they're from many, hundreds of years ago, you name it, certain weapons, maybe not from the medieval times in this case, but that were made of titanium, were these beings were carrying them, or these spirits were carrying them. And interestingly enough, I cannot help but think that, again, that same type of, I guess you could say, material or density could be used from a spiritual point to infuse and incorporate what I just referenced in the article there. So we would use titanium as biological beings to, again, activate the more nuts and bolts aspect of it. Whereas, for example, if there were some beings, say, that somehow through the explanation of different paranormal occurrences and esoteric occurrences became that of a resonating, spirit, if you will, or a ghost, as we know them to be, had some titanium on them when they biologically died, what there would be to, what would occur there once they were to transfer to the esoteric realm, if they had that on them when they die. Because, again, these spirits have been known to, wear the clothing, or the whole apparatus of or kit, if you want to call it, of what they had on before their physical body passed.
Wow. Wow, that's, I
The-
mean, yeah, that's definitely fitting right into the whole Titan side of it too, because the Titans were the pre-Olympian Greek gods who were banished, right? So here we got
right.
some very busty photos on the.
On the right, yeah.
Go down to the bottom where there's this titanium sphere picture. There it is. So
Whoa.
that's what they're finding, and it's interesting to go back to titanium and kind of its applications in the military. Not only is it very light, like we were saying, but when it's exposed to oxygen, it creates a ceramic layer of this film, an oxide film, and that basically heals it, the metal, right? So as it's like flying around in space or whatnot, if there's a scratch or whoever, if this satellite comes back into contact with oxygen, let's say, that metal will heal itself. So, all the whole science of satellites, I'm not an expert whether they're in space or they're in upper Earth atmosphere, but it sounds to me like, for the sake of like aircraft or boats, submarines, that sort of thing, this metal seems to be very durable and heals itself when exposed to oxygen. I mean, that's very very strange, and maybe that's why they're finding these complete spheres that fall to the earth, because it's not, going to corrode like normal material would when it flies through the atmosphere. The heat and the friction burn it off, whereas it seems like the oxygen is actually healing the titanium, so it's like staying like this, sphere flying through the air. Now, when you mentioned it being used in like ancient weaponry, to bring it back to the Titan connection, they're naming it after these a group of gods who were pre-Olympian, meaning that they were like the fallen angels, or the gods that were cast out of heaven, right?
Right.
So that, and then even weirder, to get like crazy conspiracy, not too crazy, but I don't want to insult anybody because I do believe in Tartaria, but the Titans were the gods who dwelled in Tartarus, which is what everyone's connecting to Tartaria. When you look into Greek myths and legends, they use this word Tartarus for hell. And
Right.
considering, what ancient cultures and present day cultures do in warfare, they tend to remember, the victor remembers the losers for the propaganda rather than the truth. So if Alexander the Great, who was a Greek man, was going out around and battling the Tartarians, it wouldn't be kind of far-fetched to see that the Tartarus would be remembered as their hell, in their myths and legends because Tartary was their enemy. You know, the Tartaria was their enemy. So of course they're going to call that place hell. You see the same thing happen with within the Bach saga with the word Helsinki and how all these pagans were in Helsinki, and the word for hell might come from that battle between the Roman Catholic Church and the pagans, where they're like, oh yeah, that's hell over there, that's the terrible place where you're going to go if you die. It's kind of like how we think of third world countries today, like, oh yeah, good luck there, uh,
Right.
and I think that it might be a little much of a tangent from our topic here, but I think people might find that Tartaria connection interesting for sure.
I absolutely agree. I definitely think they will, and I don't think you went off course whatsoever, brother. Because I was just gonna say, you had mentioned just a couple minutes ago about there being sort of like a layer that it puts over itself when
The
exposed to
oxide film.
the oxide film. If you remember last episode when we were talking about how Jacques Vallée mentioned on Joe Rogan's podcast that some of the material seems to have some type of very thin layer of film that prevents it from becoming flammable within the Earth's atmosphere. I can't help but think that there's some type or potential intertwinement there between these materials at the subatomic level, to the point where it's just so sophisticated and advanced that we don't even know how to do it. I mean, if we look, for example, at an ex a military person who was also a scientist for the military who's passed away now. I don't know if I could say his name publicly, but he had said that he had examined a particular piece of metal I think it was at a branch of Stanford University, if I'm not mistaken. And he had mentioned that he was given the proper clearances and all that. Because of how compartmentalized things were, he obviously wasn't told anything about, it being alien or what have you, but he was told that it was not from this planet. And when he analyzed the subatomic structure, he realized it was a titanium alloy. And he said for the life of him, he could not understand the concept even close to the scratching the surface of the concept of that subatomic structure. So, and tying it back to what you said, Mark, about how again back in the day, the pre-Olympian era was named after the Nephilim. It could have been the Nephilim or the fallen angels, or being one and the same or separate. It's up for debate, but I can't help but think that when you take a look at that, it's almost as if these beings, again, this is consistent with history of these ETs or otherworldly beings being here before, not just in this current time. They had this, not that they gave us this material, but that this material they had, which was and is titanium, may have been a modified version of titanium, the same way that we've modified titanium and nickel to, create nitinol, if you want to
Right.
call it. You see what I'm saying? So it's
Well,
almost,
it's
yeah,
a very, very advanced process to create titanium. I mean, that's why it hasn't,
right.
it's very relatively recently that we're seeing it utilized in all this technology. But the process, I'm looking through it right now. But you need several other chemicals in order to create what we now would consider titanium, the alloy titanium, even though it does naturally occur in ores in certain places around the world. And like we kind of speculated, maybe that's the result of meteors, similar to the way meteoric iron falls to the earth, thus the kind of space connection. But considering that there's like an ancient connection to titanium being used, it's like, how? This is
Yeah.
very advanced. You need chlorine gas, you need to create the sponge of the titanium first, and then you need to, it says here, at least this is how they do it in modern times, with a vacuum arc remelting process and the utilization of a cold hearth furnace. I mean, those might just be fancy words for simple things, and I'm an idiot, but it sounds to me like it's pretty complicated to create titanium. And how did
Brother,
it end up in ancient times, given the paradigm that we're taught?
you've given me, you've just set off a light bulb in my head, or at least what I think to be a light bulb. It may be nothing, but this is, I'm going to try and tie in everything you just said there. So if we're looking here at
Yeah.
visiontimes.com, again, I quoted this just a handful of minutes ago, but we see here the PDF documents mentioned are metamaterials, invisibility, slowing the speed of light, compressing electromagnetic energy, implanting memory metal in people, and other remarkable things. Now, if we think about, for example, the way in which, back then, and when I say back then, I'm talking thousands, tens of thousands of years ago, even Nephilim, pre-Olympian era, that whole aspect, pre-Tartaria, even during Tartaria, a lot of what's being discussed here pertaining to slowing the speed of light, compressing electro EMF energy, invisibility, metamaterials would have been considered magic. I can't help but think that directly deriving from this titanium alloy, like you said, being very difficult to make and very meticulous and particular if you want to, curate it a certain way, like that a gentleman from Stanford that said, I could not understand the structure of this whatsoever. Like, it was given to me in secrecy. I couldn't get it. I can't help but think that, again, this may have been the magical technology or material as a foundation or basis that these ancient beings used to use. And obviously they knew how to curate it to how they wanted, because obviously they were coming and going from this planet, it seemed, in some way or another, right? Maybe the way they got here was not via titanium, but clearly there's enough there to show there was a titanium alloy at the very least that they were utilizing, right? And so I can't help but think that titanium was and still is the springboard for a lot of this technology. Now, if we look, for example, at like Bob Lazar, whether you believe his story or not, one thing we cannot deny is the consistency in what he said compared to many other whistleblowers about the craft of these of these beings, regardless of what beings and what craft they have. It's always mentioned that regardless if it's a cube-shaped craft, excuse me, a pyramid craft, a disc craft, there's always, it's almost like it's claimed there's no curvatures. It's almost like someone what's the term, melted it together, if you want to call it, just like what you were saying, Mark, very difficult to make. So it's almost, again, at the subatomic level, if you could maneuver or curate titanium or a variation of it at that subatomic level, that's the word, melding. You're sort of like melding everything into one solid sort of jello looking like consortium or like, conglomerate. And it seems to be consistent with what these craft are made of, regardless of the species in which it came from. So it's almost like, again, not to go off topic or on a ramble here, but just to finish this, it's like titanium acts as a material.
1 second, buddy.
Oh, sure.
Hold on, let's pause for a second.
Oh. All right. So sorry, guys, we just had to take a quick little break. But as I was saying, it seems like, and again, I may be wrong, but it seems like titanium or a variation of it, but regardless, titanium being the foundation, almost seems like it acts as a springboard for every single or many different ET species. With regards to, the ability of it being interdimensional, we'll get to that in a second. But it's like almost, at least in this dimension, let's just say certain alien civilizations are coming from, the Pleiades or the Andromedan galaxy or Zeta Reticuli or what have you. It's almost like titanium acts as sort of a springboard foundation, and the same way that allegedly some of these gray aliens are used as sort of, like when you go to the Apple store to pick out an iPhone or something, that's the same way these beings go to a certain archive or database to say, okay, I need this type of assistant for this expedition and what have you. It's like titanium is the metamaterial version of that. And it's almost, and if we look at some of these grays allegedly telling people in the secret space program that some of them are synthetic, sentient, but also made up of the same material as their craft, it only makes me think even more. Is titanium to the point in which, is it so complicated or complex to the extent in which you can actually be or infuse yourself with titanium? And I support that with, again, quoting from visiontimes.com, the metamaterials, compressing EMF energy, but more specifically implanting memory metal in people. End quote. So I find it interesting to act as a springboard material, maybe, for these beings, for their craft. And that's why various different species seem to use the same concept. Not always, but in many cases. So again, that's just my perspective as it pertains to them coming and going interdimensionally, and titanium acting as sort of a material to, mediate that, going from one, not from one place to another in the same dimension. I'm saying from one dimension to another dimension. That is interesting too, because if we tie back to what you said, Mark, about how, again, these gods, if you will, seem to be wearing or inhibiting this material in a very, complex way that we now seem to interpret it as, I can't help but think that there was an understanding that this material was also interdimensional. It clearly was convenient enough for these beings to have and make on this planet, or bring from another planet to this one.
Mm. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, to back that up, I mean, the purity of titanium, it was like a very slow process for them to really figure out how to purify this titanium to a point where it would be applicable in things. It was curiously 1950 to 2010 was when they made the most, at least this history of titanium shows that that was the time period when they really made a lot of headway, which is just,
Right.
to me, adding so much more credence to what you're saying about how, or at least this, because it's like, okay, when we started interacting possibly with these other beings, all of a sudden our titanium production got a lot better. I mean, it does seem like a
You make
coincidence.
a great point, brother. Again, if we look over here, and I quote, um, included in the DIA documents are several pages of advanced technology reports on nitinol, a shape recovery alloy that has similar properties to the Roswell memory metal. Brigalia presents a credible case that nitinol, Brigalia being, again, the gentleman who tried to get the FOIA request on titanium alloy from Roswell, that nitinol is in fact humankind's first attempt to replicate the UFO material. Now, again, I want to mention here very quickly, General Arthur Exon, base commander at Wright-Patterson in the 1960s, who reportedly flew over the crash site in 1947, stated on tape that part of the wreckage being tested was made of, quote, specially processed titanium. End quote. And that's what, again, to add to what you just said there about how difficult it is to make specially processed. I can't help but think that that would reinforce my proposal, which could be very wrong, but could be in the general ballpark of being somewhat correct, of titanium in some variation acting as a springboard. Acting material for them, whether it's, again, maybe a certain type of titanium needs to be used for interdimensional travel for these beings. Another type is used for example, very quick speed of light travel, but not, again, not going from dimension to dimension, just bending space and time to get from one spot in this reality to another spot, right?
Right.
It seems like there could be some various mechanisms that it's used for.
Right. Yeah, it's definitely strange. And then they kind of explain further why they named it titanium. And despite, what most people might say or what you might hear in your general chemistry class, it's not named the Titan after the Titans because of the strength and the, of Titans.
Right.
It was actually this guy, he didn't want to, and this guy being Martin Heinrich Klaproth, a renowned German chemist, he didn't want to create any erroneous ideas when he discovered these chemicals. He didn't want to name them something that might lead people one way or another. And he named it the Titan because those were the first sons of the earth, right? So maybe his motivation was to give it a name that didn't kind of create any bias, but I mean, it's hard to avoid that just strangeness of like the time of the gods when we were interacting with these otherworldly beings, right? And it's named for that time period. And then when it comes back into human interaction, into our, toolkit, so to speak, we're having interaction with new otherworldly beings. I mean, to your
Right.
point, it's like we're connecting the dots. And I think that, I kind of just pick these elements out of nowhere. Like you asked me, like, all right, what are we doing this week? And I just looked at the table and I'm like, titanium. No
Exactly.
thought. And look at all the stuff we find. It's
It's
incredible.
Oh, absolutely. I also wanted to add here too. Again, this is just going off of the physical. Let me share my screen very quickly. Physical properties from Wikipedia. Again, there's some presuming this is factual, there's some very interesting things to note here, because I wanted to mention these two paragraphs specifically. Titanium is not as hard as some grades of heat-treated steel, but more importantly this year, it is non-magnetic and a poor conductor of heat and electricity. Machining requires precautions because the material can gall unless sharp tools and proper cooling methods are used. Now, gall means it's a form of wear caused by adhesion between two sliding surfaces. Let's see here. Like steel structures, those made from titanium have a fatigue limit that guarantees longevity in some applications. The metal is, now this is interesting too, is a dimorphic allotrope, and allotrope, meaning, just for those that aren't familiar, is the property of some chemical elements to exist in two or more different forms in the same physical state. It is able to exist in two or more different forms in a physical state of a hexagonal form that changes into a body-centered cubic lattice form. The specific heat of the A form increases dramatically as it is heated to this transition temperature, but then falls and remains fairly constant for the B form regardless of temperature, end quote. So in other words, I'm not a scientist, I'm not a physicist, not claiming to, be an expert in any way, but what I gather from this here is that the fact that it is, again, presuming it's speaking of titanium in the natural form that we perceive it to be in, we don't know if, in other galaxies, if it's different or what have you, but it is non-magnetic and a poor conductor of heat and electricity. A couple things come to mind for me, unless it could be, again, at the subatomic level, restructured, repurposed, re-engineered, right? We see here, for example, as well, that it has a fatigue limit that guarantees longevity. So again, as we see, for example, some of the people that picked up the material from the Roswell crash claimed, oh my gosh, this thing was strong as hell but it was super light at the same time. And if we take a look at the alien war plans or the Project Beta document penned by I think Paul F. Benowitz, if I'm not mistaken, again, that we looked at from the dark web on our live stream, we will also notice too that there's consistency there in the metal and material of that particular alien species, and that was a separate species from the species that allegedly crashed at Roswell. Very separate, because according to Mr. Benowitz, that species had just only arrived as of recently and was solely stationed in New Mexico. But sorry for the rambling, I just wanted to mention as well, the metal being a dimorphic allotrope of a hexagonal form, or a hexagonal A form, that changes into a body-centered cubic form. Again, cube, the Saturnarian cube concept, right? We see allotrope, meaning that, again, it could be in the same physical state, but some chemical elements exist in two or more different forms. And we see here, again, that sort of hexagonal pattern reoccurrence. And we see, again, fractal patterns. We see that occurring again here, hexagonal shapes. I don't think we need to be scientists to say, hold on, there's, fractal patterns everywhere. Why is there a hexagon, if I'm not mistaken, on Mars? Or is it Mars? Not Mars, Saturn, excuse me, Saturn. Why is there a hexagon over there that just seems to come out of nature? Why in beehives, there's that hexagonal shape, or those different types of fractal forms of thinking. So again, it seems like going back to over here as well, pertaining to the ability of this material to, again, create and harvest energy in many different ways. And also we see here, remember itself. I can't help but think that at the subatomic level, if there's some form of, I don't want to use the word consciousness, but some form of extremely advanced, maybe AI of sorts, that is connecting with these beings that man or operate the craft, that could explain why they're very, I guess you could say, very connected to the craft, and why these beings in some cases say the craft is us and we are the craft. And that's why in some rare, but in some cases, crashed craft have not been able to be manned. They've been able to be worked on, but not manned, even in a telepathic way, because certain beings have allegedly, like, again, sort of like the movie Avatar with James Cameron's Avatar, when those blue creatures, where they jump on the backs of those dragons and they tie their hair knot to the dragon, it bonds them. There's that unique bond there. And I can't help but think that if there's some type of infusion between the esoteric realm and that being of, similar to like the God gene concept, but within titanium alloy, excuse me, that there could be some type of emergence. And we see again, ultra, and I quote, ultra high purity titanium necessary to develop memory metal. end quote. That adds to what you just said too, Mark, brother, about, again, it being highly, highly pure. So again, sorry for the ramble, but that's
No, and you're bringing us back to what I wanted to cover next, which is its biocompatibility and how
oh,
it's used in all of these different medical applications, right? I mean, some people listening to this might have titanium in their body right now. You know, if you broke a bone, or you have a replaced bone or something like that, you know, some sort of screw or pin, there's a good chance that they use titanium because they're, you know, like I said, biocompatible. They don't, you know, degrade inside of the body. They're not going to rust or anything terrible like that. It's just going to stay as it is in your body, or at least that's what they tell us. And it's also non-ferromagnetic. I think that means it's not going to like respond to iron. It's not going to respond to like a metal detector or anything like that. If
yes.
you walk through, you know, something, or you know, God forbid, you're near a huge magnet, you won't get like stuck to it. But yeah,
Yes. No, I couldn't agree more. This also corroborates even more why, again, these beings would use titanium as a springboard for this. Because again, if it could be altered, that's a great thing, whether maybe for them or for their craft to move. But like you said, it's almost like there's no. It is factual. It seems to be that these UFOs do not respond to, or the outer layers of their craft are not affected by basic magnetic I guess you could say, incursions within the relative to the field, the geomagnetic or geographical
well,
field
and
they're in.
if you were, you know, propelling your craft with something that maybe, you know, utilized the magnetic properties of the earth and
Right.
whatever propulsion device you're using, you would theoretically maybe want your craft to not be affected by that and kind of just be sort of neutral as the magnetism is doing its work to propel the craft. I think that like shows us a little bit even further into the kind
Yes.
of,
If
you know, the properties of titanium, man.
Right, right. And if there's a way that these beings have been able to curate the titanium to the extent where they can open up the titanium to vulnerable electromagnetic incursions and then close it up using that alleged, that ether field they put around their craft, or access in, as the sort of like the foundational layer of this dimension, it would make sense. Because it's interesting to see that we look at, for example, Project Starfish Prime, which Lou Elizondo couldn't really comment on, but it allegedly had to do with an EMP trying to take down, make a UFO just drop over the ocean, over the Pacific. It's interesting because, again, it just goes, and then second time around it didn't work. So it seems like these beings upgraded their the resistance that this titanium alloy material on their craft had to responding to EMPs. So it's interesting to see that electromagnetic frequencies could hit it, but it's almost as if it hit it when these beings weren't expecting it. At the same time, it also seemed to also hit the craft at the same time, that if the beings were prepared, seemingly as they were the second time around, the electromagnetic frequencies and fields from the charges from the EMP went around. So if this was the craft, for example, went around the craft, very similar to what we cited earlier from visiontimes.com, relative to what they said about, again, the bending space and time, bending light waves, and things like this, right? Interestingly enough, I did want to mention as well too that thanks to you, brother, according to Wikipedia, titanium biocompatibility was first introduced, and I quote, into surgeries in the 1950s after having been used in dentistry for a decade prior. It is now the metal of choice for prosthetics, inner body devices, instrumentation, the whole thing, like you were saying. Now,
Yeah.
again, I can't, before I go, end quote, I can't help but think, again, the 50s, Roswell allegedly happened in 47. The way in which they said, okay, according to Colonel Corso and others, very quickly, within a matter of months after the Roswell crash, they said, how can we implement this metal, in this type of titanium alloy, into society? So I'm not saying that Roswell was the direct result of titanium being used in prosthetics and biocompatibility, but I would dare to say that it certainly advanced it to some extent or another. I mean, apparently we got from this titanium alloy, we got everything from fiber optics to the integrated circuit. Again, allowing, as we spoke of maybe 20 minutes ago, roughly, pertaining to titanium allowing the compression of memory and DNA and many different forms of EMF charges. And we know, again, electrical charges, you work with, computers as we use every day. That allows for a more compact product in the commercial industry. So again, using a variation of that to be able to compress it in correspondence with the colonels and the lieutenant colonels that said, no, we got a lot of this special varied titanium from Roswell. I mean, I'm not saying that's fact because we weren't there, but like you were saying about, again, pre-Olympian era and things like that, the consistency is there.
Yeah, very interesting. I'm finding I'm finding out now that I've had titanium crystals. They're not really crystals. They're called rutilated quartz. So they're crystals with titanium inside of them. I think it's rutile, which is what they're using to create titanium. And you could get like quartz. It's pretty interesting. It's been called like angel hair quartz and other things like that because it's like these thin gold fibers inside of the quartz and silvery and copper colored. But it's interesting. The rutile is found in Africa and all these other places. So it's one of those, what do they call them, like third world minerals that people are in the first world are robbing and polluting. And so it's definitely kind of, and I'm sure when we go further into the table of elements we'll find this with the computer industry and like the battery industry too. It's like a lot of these minerals are only found in certain places, and there becomes this like big industry around it from like one country in another country like this. I don't know the proper term. I guess they kind of covered it in the economic hitman book. What's that guy's name? John something or other. And that the topic and what we're dancing around here. I mean, you talk about a lot of big corporations. The number one corporation that works with titanium is called VSMPO AVISMA, and they're like a huge Russian multinational company with spots all over the world. But yeah, it seems like a lot of these resources come from the third world, which sadly has a pretty detrimental effect on the environment, on the world. I tend to see things from that macrocosm perspective, and
Right.
I think titanium is one of these resources or elements on the periodic table of elements that humanity has had a relationship with for much longer than we're told.
Right.
Hence the name Titan, and hence
Yes.
the connection to the ETs. I mean, it's definitely curious. I don't know if there's much more on my end to add. Anything
I
else?
mean, sure. If we wanted to sort of finish this up or top it off, I mean, one thing I would like to add too is I will share my screen here, and to be honest, I think this would be a great way to bring it full circle relative to what you were saying about the Titans and all that, because if we see here, according to newatlas.com, the headline is 2D material absorbs electromagnetic waves for superior shielding. Now, I'll be honest, I'm probably going to use this in an upcoming episode, and I will shout you out because if it wasn't for you, I wouldn't have even found this. But interestingly enough, we'll see here too that this was posted in July 23rd, 2020. Again, during the peak of the pandemic. So take that as you will, the audience. Again, putting things in plain sight right when other things are distracting the masses. But and I quote, electromagnetic interference can sorry, Mark.
No, I was about to tangent, but since you asked me,
Please.
I mean the bio implants, transhumanism, you know what I'm saying? Like
Yes.
titanium, what you just said about how they aired it, they put this story out while there's this massive distraction going on. It's like, yeah, this is when they're slipping all this transhumanism stuff by us, and it's very obvious that titanium is one of those metals that they could very well use in implants or whatever they're using.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. And we see here, and I quote, electromagnetic interference can be a serious problem for electronic devices. So shielding is usually placed around components. Now, engineers at Drexel University have found that a 2D material called titanium carbonitride is an excellent shielding material thanks to its ability to absorb rather than reflect electromagnetic waves, end quote. Now, before I go on, this seems to support that whole concept of what we were saying earlier, brother, of not just pure titanium, but a varied version or combination of titanium with something else, right? Now, if we see here, between such common technologies like radio, TV, Wi-Fi, Bluetooth, and cell phone networks, EMF signals are everywhere. But with the airwaves this crowded, electronic devices are exposed to a lot of interference, which can weaken connections, slow down data transfer speeds, and impact the overall function of devices. Now, again, that's up for interpretation from the audience as to, we know it's used for much more than that. But we see here that to prevent this, engineers build shielding materials into devices surrounding vital components. These are often thin film metal foils like copper, which reflect the errant signals back into the air. Although they do the job, these materials can add unwanted bulk to a device. Again, before we go on, end quote, reinforcing that compression of titanium being able to infuse more memory, more compact EMF compression within a much smaller space, which could explain how, again, that gentleman from Stanford couldn't understand not just the structure, but how something so small could be so complex from that shot off piece of metal of metallurgy from a craft. But we see here, and I quote, "In the quest for shielding materials with a smaller footprint, the Drexel researchers stumbled upon titanium carbonitride. It belongs to a class of two-dimensional materials called MZenes or MXenes, I guess, which have previously been shown to be useful in making conductive clays, sprayable antennas, and electrodes that could boost battery recharge speeds. In this case, the team found that sheets of titanium carbonitride, much thinner than human hair, were able to block EMF interference between 3 and 5 times better than the copper foil. But the material proved even more useful. The team found that titanium carbonitride actually absorbs the signals rather than reflecting them back out. That means they end up reducing the overall noise in the environment," end quote. I want to just add one more thing to this, which is that, again, this is the difference between, I guess you could say, science fiction and nonfiction, in the sense that when we look at EMF force fields, it's been shown in Star Trek and Star Wars that, they put the shields up and then they're getting shot at and their shields weaken the more it's penetrated. According to every single whistleblower that's worked on the anti-gravity shield propulsion side of things, they've all said, and force field side, the force fields in real life get stronger because of kinetic energy. You're hitting it, and just basic kinetic energy, or even the concept of piezoelectricity, you constantly absorbing, right? And so it's actually getting stronger, which is interesting that we see here the titanium carbonitride absorbs the signals rather than reflects them back out. So again, I mean, we see, just to end it off, and I quote, "Thanks to this absorbing ability and its innate thinness, the team says that titanium carbonitride could be used to wrap components individually in a device, preventing them from interfering with each other, even in close proximity," end quote.
Dude,
Yeah.
I think we just stumbled upon something even deeper, because when I saw that word sprayable antennas up there, if you scroll up a little further,
Yeah.
I just Googled that, and they're talking about how they can spray trees with this like sprayable titanium carbide and turn a tree into a 5G antenna tower. So
Holy
essentially,
crap.
so it says here, it says ultra thin spray applied Maxine antennas. It's spelled MXENE. New antennas so thin that they can be sprayed into place are also robust enough to provide a strong signal at bandwidths that will be used by fifth generation mobile devices, aka 5G mobile devices. Performance results for the antennas, which are made from a new type of two-dimensional material called Maxine, MXENE, the M and the X being capitalized, were recently reported by researchers at Drexel University and could have ramifications for mobile, wearable, or connected Internet of Things technology. So
Oh
basically,
my
now they
gosh.
have this spray paint that they can use.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
mean, wow. Like, who would have thought that the titanium, just in our little chat, would have brought
Yep.
us to this point? I mean, I'm not totally pressed for time. I know you said you have something to do at 5. I think I have another interview at 5 as well, funny enough.
Oh, we
But
got time. I still have, don't get me wrong, brother. I still got time. I mean, I don't mean to interrupt you. The next thing I'm thinking of is what's being fed into the predictive programming angle of things in
Mhm.
Hollywood, which is particularly within the space films. Have you ever noticed recently, whether it's Netflix films or movies at theaters, you ever notice that human astronauts, whether it's an alien film or not, if it has to do with space in general, they will spray something like the repairman of a space crew when he's inside or outside of the craft, regardless, he or she would spray something to fix, say, like a pipe, and then that spray would manifest into a physical material and then mold itself around what it's got to hold together. Do you know what I'm speaking on? Sort of, again, maybe we could tie this into black goo, possibly some element of it using titanium and some type of synthetic form, I guess you could say, of, again, I don't want to say AI because it's being used so broadly these days, but again, like you mentioned 5G, I know we have to be careful of that because of YouTube. I mean, in terms of connecting that to certain things, but nothing wrong with bringing up titanium and 5G, especially when it's cited by Drexel University. I mean, like, yeah, this is big stuff. This is
Mm.
no anything else on your end by chance, because that's a great revelation.
Yeah, it looks like they have the way that they look, it's like a little circuit board with a tab coming out of the bottom side of it, and it's like sprayed black.
Let
So
me
it's
for those watching on YouTube, we're looking
yeah,
at
you
this.
got the same one as me. Cool.
Yeah.
So yeah, this is what they're going to be rolling out. It seems like that's like a test sort of
Right.
technology there. But I mean, dude, think about the applications of a spray on antenna. I
Yep.
mean,
Yep.
like that is incredible. And I mean, you can just go and see in cities like how already the energy is like thick, if you I don't know
Yes.
if you're near a big city, but like I'm not too far from New York City, and anytime I go there I'm always very drained after I'm like on my way back, and it
Mhm.
takes like a couple days to kind of recuperate. And I don't exactly live in the middle of the woods where I'm at, but at the same time, if we're going to look at the spectrum, there's a
Yes.
much higher volume of that kind of energy in a city than there is in a suburb, or even further in a rural setting. So, wow. I mean, and to think that now they can just spray this stuff anywhere,
Yep.
and it would, essentially be like points on their grid. Like they could just, I mean, essentially maybe even spray our rooftops with this crap,
Right. Yeah.
rooftops, and like spray it from the sky. I mean, geez, it's incredible. Like, not to go into like the chemtrail stuff, because we've talked about that on the show with Matt Landman, but
Yep.
the chemtrails are, it doesn't seem that far fetched that they might spray something like this in the air, especially given what we know about how durable titanium is. So,
Right. Yes. I mean, if we look here as well, and I quote, their performance exceeded, pertaining to that of what we're seeing, what we were just speaking on. Their performance exceeded that of several other new materials being considered for antennas, including silver ink, carbon nanotubes, and graphene. And significantly, these performance numbers did not waver when the how do we pronounce it? MXene, MXene,
they said
or
it's pronounced Maxine,
or
like
Maxine.
like the female name Maxine.
Oh, got you. Thank you. It did not waver when the Maxine antennas were subjected to as many as 5,000 bending cycles, a mark of durability that far surpasses its peer materials, end quote. So, again, not to dismiss graphene as said here, mentioned here, and say, oh, all of a sudden this Maxine material is better. But if we look at going back to, half an hour, 40 minutes ago, the composition of titanium being the springboard, not just for these ETs, but even for, again, for humans, I can't help but think that using things like, or applying methods of, the Fibonacci sequence or fractal patterns, things like that, regardless of who's making this material, whether for what purpose, whether it's for human use, alien use, whatever all these living things in all these different galaxies are using it for, the consistency is that the starting point is titanium. That's what
Mm,
seems to be the case.
yeah.
I could be wrong, but again, yeah, I mean, this is a great find,
Well,
brother.
you
Wow.
know, yeah, and I'm not even gonna say it, but because of the bullshit censorship. But I mean, Maxine rhymes with what?
Yeah, but
I'm not anti-Max. I'm anti. It's like
right.
it doesn't surprise me that they do something like this. And then also, I've spoken to several people about the graphene topic, and in my opinion, some of them seem a little weird, like straight
Yeah,
up weird. And I've dealt with a lot of people in this realm of conspiracy podcasting, and the people who are going out, and I don't want to name names, but the people who are going out on this graphene topic are a little sketchy, in my opinion. And it's like, that's what they do. They throw like a diversion out there, like graphene, while this Maxine stuff is really the, actual what they're going to be rolling out.
that's a
You know?
brother. That's a great perspective to take. I couldn't agree with you more because again, everyone's talking about graphene, even the mainstream media, not as much as people in our community with delving into graphene oxide and things like that. But like you said, to give a little bit of the truth to again that example of the shack, you have a bunch of secrets hidden in a shack, and someone finds it. So you give up some secrets to protect the rest. That seems to be applied right here pertaining to graphene, the evolution of it. But at the same time, like you just said, it could be a diversion from something, or maybe literally Maxine. We see here, and I quote, in the paper, Gogotsky and his collaborators, blah, blah, including blah, 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 blah. Let me see. Reported on the performance of 3 sets of spray-coated Maxine antennas, which were between 7 to 14 times thinner and 15 to 30 times lighter than a similar copper antenna. Even thinner than a coat of paint, they tested the antennas in both lab and open environments for key performance measures of how efficiently the antenna converts power into directed waves, gain radiation efficiency, and directivity. And they did the testing at the 3 radio frequencies commonly used for telecommunication, including one in the target frequency of operation for 5G devices. Now, again, I got to be, end quote, I got to be careful there, but how convenient, if you will. But at the same time, yeah, I mean, like you said, a diversion, I would not rule that out whatsoever.
Wow. Yeah, man. And Drexel of all places to be doing this. I mean, they are
Yeah.
their symbol is a dragon. They're in mysterious Philadelphia. And to bring Columbus back up, both Philadelphia and Columbus, where you said this titanium is being developed, right?
Yep.
Both on the 40th parallel, which, I do another podcast with Michael Wan, and him and a guy named Ross Ben have a podcast called From the 40th Parallel. And they talk about all the weird, strange conspiracies that connect to the 40th parallel that goes around the globe. And, it's not just in the United States. The 40th parallel crosses like most of the landmass in the earth. I think out of all of the latitude lines, it probably covers more earth than any other, just because of its location, where like Asia kind of is with Russia and all that. But yeah, it's very strange to to see that connected in this whole thing as well, because according to a lot of what Mike and Ross Ben research, they use these energetic places. We talked about ley lines in our first podcast together. They
Yeah.
use these energetic places to add power to whatever they're doing, whether that's in their business, in their ritual, in their private lives. They have an understanding of the way the physics, the metaphysics are actually, and they keep us in a state of ignorance in order for them to be a couple steps ahead. And we see this with the alien thing. It's like, well, they've been dealing with aliens since the 40s, and now in 2020 they're like, oh well, we're going to
Yeah. Yeah. I know exactly what you're saying. Yep.
so here we are now, finding all these weird connections. And yeah, man, I've not heard of Maxine before, but
This
when
is
I
great.
first heard of graphene, you know, if this isn't in conjunction with it, it's at least the sort of like Trojan horse, graphene's the Trojan horse for Maxine, right? Like we'll let them know about graphene, but don't tell them about Maxine, like not until it's sprayed. Once it's
And then
sprayed,
if by accident, or if it is time for it to be revealed to the public in some variation of deceit, still they'll say no, but look, we've had the reports out for how many years now, and they'll
right,
probably cite exactly the same website that we were just reading from,
exactly. You're
and
like, oh, well, you didn't notice while all the riots and the pandemic was going on? We told everybody, it was right out
yep.
there, behind those huge headlines about George Floyd.
Exactly, brother. I couldn't agree with you more. Other than that, unfortunately, I probably do have to get going just by the
No
time
worries, dude. Yeah,
this
this is a good
episode
one.
file compresses and everything. But is there please, if you can tell my audience as per usual how and where they can find you, and of course your information will be in the description of the YouTube videos as well.
Right on. Yeah. Well, I am on YouTube, even though I've gotten a couple strikes already. I've only been
Oh,
posting my podcasts on there for like a month, and I use my audio host. It like automatically uploads the audio files for the My Family Thinks I'm Crazy podcast to YouTube. And
yeah.
already two of my episodes, one with James from We the People Radio, which was I expected because we talked about QAnon, we talked about Trump, we talked about all kinds of stuff that
Okay.
YouTube wants to censor. But then, curiously enough, a episode titled Mystic Deserts and
Oh,
like some other things with Corey Daniels, where we did talk about Trump, but we didn't talk about Q at all. And they removed that one too. And I have a strike on my channel. So I'm not really looking to promote my YouTube, but I will clear that up. So if
sure.
you are against censorship like I am, listen to my show on a podcast player. You probably already are if you're listening to the My Family Thinks I'm Crazy podcast or the Generation Z podcast. So follow me there. And then I have a Rockfin. If you do like the video content, that's where I've been putting my video content. And unfortunately, like YouTube and Patreon are tied together, and Vimeo costs money. So it's like, I kind of am screwed out of putting videos on my Patreon if YouTube blocks me, right? If they give me
Mm,
strikes, then for a week I can't post anything and so on, yada yada yada.
right.
So
Yeah.
I'm just looking to create my audience some, or create, but push the audience that listens to my show.
Right.
Those of you who I'm very grateful for, please support me on Rockfin, where I'm not going to get censored. And then yeah, just the good old fashioned podcasting feed. My family thinks I'm crazy.
Awesome, brother. As always, this was phenomenal. I look for, and I'm sure not just myself, but the audience, whether it's the visual side or the audio side, look forward to the next episode, and we will
Yeah.
catch everybody later on. Cheers.
All right, Dave. Peace out, bro.